Let's face it, you're going to need AI skills. It's not like we're asking you to, become a software developer without the aid of these tools. It's part of the industry already. I've spoken to many developers who that was their goal, to get into FAANG. They got into FAANG. Sure, it was great. They got the nice vests, they got the money. Now they're miserable because they're either worried about making some random ranking, or they're worried about the next big layoff, or they're worried about going into the office because the remote perks are going away, or they're working on something they absolutely hate and is not like anything interesting.
All right, great. Hey, it's Adrienne Tacke. How are you? It's been a while. How have
It
you been?
has been a minute. It's been great, and I'm happy to be here. How are you, VJ?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. I wanted to just, reconnect with people who have been with, Hack Buddy, the group. And
Yeah.
for those people who don't know, I invited Adrienne after I saw her, doing talks for her original book, which I saw was like a intro to Python. It was in Barnes and Noble, so I was like, oh, this is cool. I want to actually see this person and see what she has to say about, everything, becoming a software engineer, general career advice. So, and I kind of just want to, continue things. Like in 2025, the theme so far has been, well, it's a mix of things, right? Like technology is changing again. AI, that's like the big buzzword everywhere.
Global disasters, artificial intelligence taking over.
People are worried about their work and their jobs, but at the same time, a lot of people are learning to use tools with AI. And so there's a lot of exciting development. And I think like one question that has continued to linger around, and it's always good to get everybody's take, is, how do I do well in this job market? It's always tough, but that said, what are people doing? What is Adrienne doing? So let's start with that. Let's start with, just basically how have you been? Like, what have you been up to in the time since Zillow?
Oh man, I'm trying to remember and go back in time with what I did. When I did that meetup, I was like fresh into understanding JavaScript, and I remember I was trying to talk through how to solve some advent of code puzzles with JavaScript, and it was a really good vibe at that meetup because we were debugging in real time, and it was really big on Instagram too. That's kind of where I started this whole sort of start of teaching what I was going through as a software engineer. And since then, my life has taken some twists and turns. So that was probably the last time I held a full-on software engineer job. I transitioned into developer advocacy because of things like this, because of speaking at meetups, because of sharing what I was learning and my experience on Instagram. I have since been at MongoDB and at Cisco as a developer advocate, and I'm currently at a company called VM, which does it's a robotics platform. So the phrase now is we're we're working with physical AI, bringing AI into the real world, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. Yeah, so now I'm doing developer advocacy for a robotics platform.
That's good. There was a lot of good stuff in there that I think of course, like you're kind of going through sort of fast, but especially for a recap. But there are things that I definitely wanted to, just point out or ask about again because they're really interesting. So I think you said that, you made the change from software engineer to basically developer advocate, and then you also said that you became more of a mentor and you started teaching people at conferences and also helping people learn, the ropes. You wrote a book as well, and I feel like we should talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit. You wrote several books, so it's kind of sort of your pick. But so I have a lot of friends in this space. Not everybody, is cut out to be like, coding all the time, right? Like just sitting there and working on like project after project. So, people will say to me like, I really like, JavaScript, or I really like, Python, but I can't code for hours and hours and hours. I just want to architect something, or I want to try some other role. So I would love it if you could explain like what a developer advocate is to people out here watching and like what kind of role it is and how it differs from like the typical software engineer role.
Absolutely. Just for just to follow up on that, like I am one of those people that cannot code for hours on end. Like for me to really enjoy coding, there needs to be some sort of goal in mind at the end, or I need to be really, really interested in what I'm building. Other than that, it's kind of like I can put it away. I can easily walk away from the screen. But yeah, developer advocacy, even since I started, the role has changed and evolved significantly from when I first entered into that realm. But at least from my experience, when I started it, you were the connection between your company and the developers that are using the company's products. So I'll start at MongoDB. Most folks here in your audience might know what that is. It's a NoSQL document database, and at the time that I was working there, we were offering basically a cloud version of the document database. So we were trying to show developers, hey, if you need a cloud native document database, MongoDB Atlas is worth taking a look at, especially if you already know MongoDB or you need some, cloud native features like being able to replicate in several regions or changing the rate of reads and writes depending on how much you need to scale, all those different things that come with cloud native products. We were basically there as developer advocates to teach you how to implement a cloud native document database in your applications. So that, just taking that, you can now split that up into so many different responsibilities. On larger dev advocacy teams, you might have a split where some people focus on a specific channel. So for example, I had a colleague who very much was just a YouTube person. That's what they enjoyed to do. They like to create YouTube videos. That's their mechanism of teaching. And that's what they did. They taught how to use MongoDB via YouTube videos. Another person, at least when I first started, would do the Instagram route. So I was still very much on the carousels or, doing a picture, but then posting in the caption really long. But, here's what to look out for. Or here's the latest feature in MongoDB Atlas 4.4 or something. Or here's how to use a stage in the aggregation pipeline. There's that. Then there's actual demo apps. So you build the initial application that devs might download and play around with. They might extend. Other times there are tutorials or blog posts that take you step by step on how to implement something. So there's a whole gamut of essentially content creation is what you're doing that is geared for the developer. And because ideally you have a developer background or understand the needs and difficulties and challenges that devs go through, you kind of build that empathy into the content that you're creating. So if there's like a random quirk and developers might get tripped up because you're supposed to use, say, I don't know, a specific ID or else you're going to get an error, like only you would know that because you've done it and you've been a dev and you know that this is how software development works. And that's kind of the point of having developer advocates that have a development or some sort of software background, is that you can talk to other devs and let them know this kind of stuff ahead of time. Speaking at conferences, I don't know, I like it. I like getting nervous. I like standing up in front of a large crowd. I like really creating elegant slides that aren't just bullet points, but really help in the topic or aid and what I'm trying to teach. And then there's no substitute for like when somebody comes up to me after a talk and they're like, I finally get this topic, like something that it's like that spark when you first have something work in programming. It's a feeling that's really, really awesome to have. And so that's kind of what if I can, sometimes you don't always get the choice to be like, I only do conference talks, but if I can, I try to focus on just applying to different conferences. And sometimes it's work related, usually. Other times they'll be on topics that I like.
I think there's a lot of people, again, who want to do something with software. They want to do something with code, but they're not really like there's so many angles with this, right? Like you can code and you can write for like big, large, legacy projects or big, large apps. And most of the work in software engineering is very Scrum focused, where it's like very ticket based. You pick up a ticket, you start working on it, you finish with the ticket, you go to the next. After you make your pull request, you get a review, then go to the next, go to the next, go to the next. But like you said, there's a lot of people who don't like that aspect of work. They want to do something different, right? And they want to do something more content based or content generation, like tutorial based. And I actually think that there is a need for that, especially in today's market, because software moves super fast all the time. Things are changing. And every time things change, people need guides, they need help, they need, new
Ideally.
tutorials.
Yeah.
Yeah, like doing prompt engineering is kind of like a new thing, right? Like so, I'll give you an example of this too, right? I was building something by myself, and I was able to complete it like in 2 to 3 months, and then my boss started playing around with prompt engineering, and he was able to build something that was based on what I built, but he was able to build it in 3 or 4 weeks. And I was like, that's pretty crazy. But like literally all he did was just kind of start like looking at the code that I wrote and then trying to like figure out like, okay, what are you building here and how can I like build off of that? So that's not to say like, I want to, talk about AI right now. I think like for me though, it's more or less just kind of like figuring out like, okay, uh, what kind of things are out there that I could be aware of? Like, how do I leapfrog my boss at this point? Right? Like I feel like that's like a job in some ways. And if there's someone out there who is dedicated to that, like content creation, like you, I feel like that's such a good space to be in.
I think it is funny how it affects our careers and the industry in general. And I want to zero in on something you said there, where it's like, yeah, your boss was able to create something in 3 to 4 weeks, and that's kind of the whole point, right? I actually do like that part about AI making coding more accessible to folks and democratizing that. You don't need to have our specialty. And it's kind of weird hearing that from like another previous software engineer, right? Because that's the whole scare, is that it's going to replace us. But the thing is, if you take a look at any of these things, you'll see we're still constantly reminded that we need to review these things. We still see several thousand examples of like, it's not actually that smart. And we also see that even though anybody can do it, there are certain levels of quality that still exist. So someone who may not be as technical creating something, creating an app, versus a software developer who's using AI to help them get started, there's going to need to be major differences there, because a software developer, at least one who doesn't just vibe codes and trusts everything that the AI is producing, I think it can help us because you have the understanding of what's actually going on in the code. You still need to go through it. You need to make sure there are no hallucinations. You need to make sure context is there. And then let's say you start to continue to use AI, or every software dev is continuing to use AI. We're all kind of using the same language models. So where do you now have your business differentiator? Where are you unique if all the other devs are using the same language models that you are? So that's where that human touch is still extremely important. That's why I think we're not going to be replaced. And that's where I think, you still have a very large spot. Everybody does. Anyone that's worried about AI in that sense shouldn't be. I think we have that nuance, that judgment, that larger understanding. Like another example of this is, for as good as we are right now, they're pretty good. Like it's not as stupid as it was maybe 2 years ago. But
True.
the thing is, when you have also a limit on the number of tokens that can be used, and we're talking about context and understanding. So if you start to build an application using AI and you continue to extend it and build it and grow it, well, there's going to be a point as well where, just like humans, that once you reach that token threshold, it's not going to be able to understand your entire application now. So if you want to continue extending it, it's going to have trouble. It's going to have to start dropping off some of the older stuff. There's still very much a place for our experience, what we've seen, what we know, how a project works, how the project standards are, and all of that context. It's still not ready yet in terms of AI completely taking over everything.
Absolutely. I think, again, like the things you're saying too are really good for people out there who need to hear this. Like obviously, like the tools, they're getting easier to use in some ways. We're all kind of speaking similar languages now as the languages converge, from the old days of just like writing like, Objective-C or like C++ or something like that to JavaScript to then Python, which became a little bit easier to write. And now you have basically English in some ways. But, I think like ultimately though, you can't just say, all right, the AI is going to do everything. Because then if the AI does everything, then you're just kind of like hoping that it's going to make what you want, right? You have to kind of like have the vision to kind of guide it, to kind of like say, all right, this is the way it should be. And I think like pieces of that is the AI still has to write the code. I mean, somebody's got to write the code because the old machines, the legacy machines don't understand English. Only the AI does, right? And the AI has to be able to convert that all back down into binary or whatever language it's using to like work with the actual architecture underneath the hood. So that part you have to actually be aware of. You have to be like, all right, it's coding JavaScript for me, for example, but I need to know JavaScript. I need to know Python because like if I don't know these things, it's just making it up. And then, I'm going to get into a point where all this code that I've written with AI, it looks good to me, but it may not actually be really good at all, right? And I think like that's where a page from your book could probably really help, right? Because you said, this looks good to me. I think it's going to be doubly important for AI. Is it really good?
Yeah, I think now that we're in the age of AI and everybody is kind of asking, can we just use it for everything, especially for something like code reviews? That's where I'm doubling down. Like, no.
Nope.
Take a look at all the code that we're generating with AI. Like, it's even more important now. If there's any one skill as a new software dev who's like still in college and you're worried because everything's just going to be replaced or nobody's going to hire junior engineers, don't think that. Like, you need to hone your skills. Critical reading skills, critical comprehension skills. You still need to know the basics of programming. Like, you can't tell me that you won't know how an if statement works or how a loop might potentially be an infinite loop and then generate code and not see these types of things immediately. You
Absolutely.
need to understand the rules of the game in order for you to use these types of things to help you. What's troubling now is that there are a lot of folks who are kind of like, yeah, let me just vibe code my assignment or let me just do this. And my one piece of advice, if they listen, is look, that's there and that's great and it's there to help you. I say really try to solve it on your own. And what you use AI for is for something that may not make sense to you. For example, if there's something your teacher is teaching, your professor is trying to explain and you don't get it, use AI to help it explain it to you. Can you tell me why this code is not optimized? Or can you tell me why this implementation is better than the other? Or even if you go through and try to, let's say, invert a tree, like have it step by step go through and explain it to you. Have it tell it to you like it's a Lord of the Rings novel. Have it tell it to you like you're a 5-year-old child. I'm like, those are the ways that you can really take advantage, because we didn't have that. Like, I had to suffer through. I'm like, I still don't understand this, but I think this is what this means. Versus if you really push yourself to not use the tool to just solve the problem, but to try to solve it yourself and then kind of check yourself or use it to help you solve it on your own, I think you will have a much better foundation with AI. And let's face it, you're going to need AI skills. It's not like we're asking you to still, become a software developer without the aid of these tools. It's part of the industry already. So better for you to have that knowledge, that understanding, that foundational base. And then I would argue you're farther ahead because you now grew up and have access and have experience with these tools, but you have it in what I would argue the correct way.
Tying it back to you, Adrienne, like I really want to know, like, maybe like for your upcoming and even like current talks, where has your focus been too? Like, what are you kind of talking about these days? Like, are you talking about AI as well, or are you talking about career advice? I'm really curious.
Yeah, right now the talks that I'm focused on are obviously about my book. So I'm talking about code reviews. For anybody who doesn't know, I wrote a book called Looks Good to Me, Constructive Code Reviews. And I aim for it to be this evergreen, like this is the book for code reviews. So it's less about what do you do or look for in a code review, because that can differ across teams and languages. And like if I wrote a book like that, that book would be huge. But this is more about the team dynamics and formulating the process of a code review that works for your team. For some teams, it might be really, really small, very lax process. For other teams, it might have very many steps and is super structured. So it depends. So the talk I give now is kind of like the highlights of how do we make our code reviews better? What can you do as an author of a pull request or a set of code changes? How do you be a better author? And then on the flip side, how do you be a better reviewer? Like, what are your responsibilities? How do you make the code review actually work and be effective rather than this process that everybody has something to complain about? So it has a lot of love built into it. And the talk that I give is like the quick, TLDR of the book about it. And then, now that I'm working at a robotics company, I am talking about building robots, which is kind of cool, specifically using the VM platforms. I have a couple demos that I do. I show how to code, for example, computer vision detection, a custom model, basically building a custom model with the platform and then deploying that model onto Raspberry Pis or to ESP32s and all the other really cool things you can do with off-the-shelf hardware. And how basically TLDR, if you want to work with hardware, it's hard because there's all these drivers and all these different languages that you have to learn. And we're kind of trying to build the API for all hardware. You have a single language to talk with any camera, any sensor, any this, and it should make it easier to build any type of robot. And so it's been really fun to learn about hardware because that's completely new to me.
Yeah. No, this is actually a great segue into like some new stuff that we could potentially have you on for.
Yeah.
So one thing that people mentioned to me, another watcher had told me, was that, since like HackBuddy is like, speaking to a lot of people who are younger, actually they want things that are also like focused towards like younger kids, teaching them how to use hardware, teaching them how to like write code, kind of like what your original book did, right? Which I think is still really useful. Because like even adults will read it, and people who are casual and I think like that has a lot of appeal because like you said, things are getting more democratized, and with the rise of AI, people are able to learn all kinds of different languages. One side that's still missing is the hardware piece. Like you don't really understand like how it all ties back into architecture. Even if you're an AI coder, you may not understand LLM, right? Like how that actually translates back down to architecture. So it would be good to show that to a lot of people, especially the younger people. How does this code eventually get mapped back down to hardware? Because like that itself, like you're talking about Raspberry Pi and universal languages that you can speak to different endpoints on the hardware itself and having an API for that. That's a really useful skill to have in 2025. But I think like that's something still that AI can't really do for you. And I don't think a lot of companies want AI to do that for them, especially if they're making proprietary hardware.
Right.
One example comes to mind is probably Nintendo, right? Like they made their own Switch, right? And Switch 2, and they really lock it down. So they're like, hey, you cannot go in here and understand this stuff. So what is a younger person supposed to do if they're like, hey, in the future, I want to work at, Nintendo, or I want to work at one of these gaming companies or hardware companies? How, like, it used to be easy to just kind of like pick up a camera and like, identify all the pieces, but now in like our culture where everything is like locked down, closed source, and even like on subscription models, people are easy to just throw things away and like, go to the next device. But like I think for the younger people, right, this is such a good area, especially for you. I think like it remains to be seen. Like people should be shown how does this stuff translate down and what's the workflows? Like how do we get started with things like this? I know I can possibly ask ChatGPT some of these questions, and I probably will, but at the same time, I feel like human experience and human exposure is so good too, So
Absolutely. I think this also contributes to, like, I always see a lot of things from my past that are coming back. And for example, people are like this next generation super excited about the wind up cameras, the one time use cameras where you still have to develop
yeah,
the film, or people are going back to dumb cell phones like Blackberries, and like they're actively going back to these things because fortunately for us, we grew up with that type of technology where we were still present. I in my opinion, we were like in the weird range of like being on the cusp of this new tech and computers and being connected with the internet, but we were also kind of the last generation to still see what it was like before that. And so
right.
we have this really unique experience with that, and I think it's super cool to see the next generation be super thrilled with that, like going back to analog cameras and figuring those things out. So from what you were saying, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of folks who still want to understand how things work, and no better place to start than to just go back in time a little bit, find those older pieces of tech, find those things that are not for sale anymore, go to your Goodwill and find a VCR. People are like, what the heck's a
Yeah,
VCR? Like take it apart, see what happens, and
yeah.
just see where our roots came from and how it evolved into whatever it is now, or maybe understand what the flaws were of the old tech, and then that puts you onto a new perspective for how things are now. So yeah, it's always useful to look back a little bit.
Said, I think this is actually really interesting. Like I always kind of sometimes like think, okay, what kind of content should I put out to for HackBuddy, or just in general, like what should I be teaching? Because I don't know if people know this, but like I consider myself a mentor. Actually, I know a lot of people think this of me. They're like, oh, VJ's back on YouTube, thank you. I needed help with coding and mentorship. But so the main thing is, right, like a lot of people associate FAANG, working at FAANG, like Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Amazon, Google, as like the pinnacle of software engineering. But like if you take a step back for a minute, these are all just companies that were just really successful in the last 2 decades that made it on a new platform like social media, right? Like that's the one we're kind of complaining about right now. But if you really kind of think about it, maybe only a handful of them actually are doing things that I would say like are tied to the real world. A lot of it is like dealing with stuff on the internet. Google's a search engine. Apple is, well, they have the iPhone, but like they have theirs in the recent Apple, it's more subscription based. It's all like services based, like TV and all this stuff. And then they've got the app business, and Facebook is just pretty much social media. Netflix is also just TV. Uh, but I think like there's been like almost kind of like a loss, like in some ways, like with the older stuff, right? Like you're saying VCRs, physical media, all of these things. I would even just add music to that, right? Like music has suffered greatly, And I feel like engineering has suffered greatly in music too. Now we're kind of like at the level where we're just letting AI write music. Whereas in the old days, we used to be able to kind of like uh, build, chipsets and things that would make the music that we played like more interesting or create like more interesting sounds, like the Yamaha. There were like certain keyboards from the 80s that come to mind that made like interesting sound. So I kind of want to say, right, like if you're a software engineer and you're like, well, I want to work at FAANG because they pay a lot of money and like they're the ones doing really, really well. I'd say like you're not being true to your identity in some ways because like if you're a software engineer or an engineer in theory, you should be able to work anywhere. You should be able to work like for anything, and you should be able to identify places out there that could benefit from new thought processes or new engineering ideas. So like maybe music could be one of them. Maybe cars too. Like I feel like that's actually kind of a good space to be in, like working in cars. I had a discussion with someone at Starbucks the other day and we were talking about space exploration. So if you have software skills, you should probably look into those sectors and even biotech and medical because just truly like from my own conversation circles too, I kind of feel like these are the spaces that are going to explode in the next 2 decades, especially like things like biotech, energy space, all that stuff. So try to go back into the physical world. That's kind of like what I'm saying here,
Mhm.
and learn about how the physical world works. Learn about like physical things. Don't just put all of your eggs in the internet basket, because like I feel like that may be kind of like leading you to like more pain in the future. It could be layoffs or whatever. Whereas like there might be like a lot of great work to do in the real world that hasn't been discovered yet. Do explore, do and learn about like how everything works, not just the software.
Absolutely. I will support that by saying I would argue you'd have a more interesting time building more interesting things going into some sort of physical industry, whether that's manufacturing, healthcare, education, like anything where you're actually interacting with people or with products will always be a bit more interesting. The only thing I can vouch for FAANG is you definitely get to learn about scale and how to work with trillions of transactions per second or ridiculous throughput that you probably will not have a chance to experience in like medium-sized and smaller businesses. But other than that, FAANG, most folks are surprised to find some, not all departments, but once you get to those quote unquote upper echelons, it's just as dysfunctional. There are just also folks who don't have processes. There are also difficult people there. There are also things that don't work the way that they should. And everyone kind of puts this golden halo on like, if I make it into this company, I've made it as an engineer. And really, when you get there, I've spoken to many developers who have, that was their goal, to get into FAANG. They got into FAANG. Sure, it was great. They got the nice vests, they got the money. Now they're miserable because they're either worried about making some random ranking, or they're worried about the next big layoff, or they're worried about going into the office because the remote perks are going away, or they're working on something they absolutely hate and is not
Exactly.
like anything interesting.
That's literally who I'm speaking to, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like if you don't, if you wanted to work at FANG because you actually like the company,
Yes.
that's good.
Yes.
Like if you actually like what they do, then go work there. But if you're somebody who is just chasing salary and like worrying about layoffs, then you need to redo. You're stuck in the dopamine loop or whatever you want to call it here, right? Like you're stuck in the trap. And that's what we want to lift you out of today with this video, I suppose. Don't fall into the trap. Try to find your identity. I think that's key, right? And now Adrienne's going to go like, this is my next book, Identity.
We'll see. I have a lot to do before I go back into the trenches of writing another book.
It's like, like how they had Will I Am or I Am Robot or something like that. It should be like I am, AI or something like that. because that literally is like what is going to make or break you in the next decade. I think that's what I think, but I am the host of this show too, and my job is to find out from all the people who hang out at HackBuddy, all the cool engineers, the developer architects, and everybody, like what's going on. So, so Adrian, I want to thank you again for your time. Before you go, just like any parting thoughts, and then as well as like how do people find out more about you? And let's say they want to hear more, just because like there are things that I didn't point out today. Where can they go to find you?
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was great, great conversation. I'm
Yeah,
mostly active on LinkedIn these days. So I know some folks are like, but that is where I am. I have been dabbling just with our conversation. I'm like, do I go back to being more active on, say, Instagram or Blue Sky, which I also have accounts on there? I'm still thinking about it. I don't know. Yeah, you can find me on Blue Sky randomly, Instagram every now and then, but mostly on LinkedIn, especially if you want to talk about code reviews or robotics or anything like that. Definitely hit me up there. And parting thoughts, like AI is here to stay. I definitely think it's going to be a human AI collaboration that's going to make us successful as software engineers. So embrace it, but understand our part in it, and that AI can't replace our creativity. They can't replace our judgment. They can't understand nuance and context. And if we just remember that part of it and lean into it, then I think AI will be something for good for us rather than something to be afraid of.
awesome. Thank you for that, and yeah, all the best with everything you're doing. Yeah,
Thanks.
just keep me, up to date on what you're doing, and we'd love to have you back as often as we can here at HackBuddy. So I hope to
Def-
see you around in more coffee chats and more tutorials and all kinds of stuff.
Definitely. Thank you for having me. All the best to you as well.